Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You ever grow up feeling like you were just an extra piece in someone else's puzzle? Like your whole existence was only tolerated because you filled a space that would have otherwise been inconveniently empty? That was me, Emily Shaw. And from as early as I could remember, I wasn't anyone's first choice. I was the fallback plan, the standby seat on a full flight, the safe, boring option when nothing better came along. Nobody ever said it straight out, of course. My family was way too polite for that. But they didn't have to say it. You could feel it in the way they looked at me compared to how they looked at my cousin Sam. Samantha Shaw, God, even her name sounded like a damn magazine cover. She was the golden girl. Blonde, perfect teeth, straight-A student, debate team captain, homecoming queen, internship at some senator's office by the time she was 18. You'd think she farted glitter and shit ambition. Every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July, every family barbecue turned into a tribute reel to Sam's achievements. Aunt Denise would start it, of course. Did you hear Samantha got accepted early decision to Yale? And the rest of the table would melt into applause like she'd just cured cancer. Meanwhile, I was sitting there with a solid B-plus average, part-time job at the local bookstore, and a quiet interest in design and marketing that no one ever thought to ask about. They never said I wasn't good enough. But they sure as hell acted like I wasn't quite there. Not bright enough, not polished enough, not exceptional enough. I was steady, practical, reliable. The kind of girl who'd make a good office assistant or a school teacher, something secure. I once heard my Uncle Mark say, after one too many beers at a Christmas party, that I'd probably marry a nice accountant and have a sensible little life. I don't think he meant it as an insult. But I remember how Sam laughed, that smug little chuckle she did when she thought no one else noticed. I noticed. I noticed everything. The worst part wasn't even the comparisons, it was the way my parents went along with it. They didn't defend me, not really. My mom would just smile tightly and say, well, Emily's always been more low-key, like that was a compliment. My dad would nod along and change the subject. They weren't cruel. Just indifferent. Like they didn't expect much from me, so there was no point in pushing. By the time I hit 25, Sam had already landed a flashy marketing job at one of those boutique firms in the city, modern office, exposed brick, kombucha on tap, the whole damn stereotype. Her LinkedIn photo looked like a Vogue shoot. Everyone acted like she'd made it to the top of Mount Olympus. I remember that family dinner clearly. Uncle Mark raised a glass and toasted her new title like she'd just won a Pulitzer. Director of Client Strategy, or some shit like that. I didn't say much. I just sat there and smiled. But inside, something cracked. Because the truth is, I wasn't sitting around doing nothing. I'd started my own small design consultancy the year before. Nothing fancy, just me, my laptop, and a few local clients I picked up through word of mouth. But I had ideas. I saw patterns. I understood what people wanted, even when they couldn't quite articulate it. I wasn't flashy, but I was good. And I was growing. Quietly, steadily, without a single person in my family realizing what the hell I was building. I didn't need a damn toast. I needed time. And I was giving myself just that. Ever felt like you were just the backup plan in your own family? Like no matter what you did, it was never quite good enough? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Let's get real here. A few more years passed and my business got legs. I brought in one freelancer, then two, then a full-time project manager. We weren't flashy, but we were profitable. While Sam was doing PowerPoint presentations and polishing buzzwords in boardrooms, I was closing deals with clients who didn't care about titles, they cared about results. Still, to my family, I was doing that little business thing. No one asked questions. No one saw me coming. Then I heard through an old mutual acquaintance that Sam had been promoted, again. Something called Client Transformation Lead. I had no idea what it meant, but it sounded like a made-up title for a team that wasn't performing. I did some digging, old habit, curiosity more than anything. Turns out, her team had been bleeding clients for over a year. Bad leadership. Bad strategy. Bad hires. but Sam still got a shiny new title. That's when something shifted in me. That's when I stopped just smiling quietly at dinners and started thinking differently. Started planning. Because sometimes being the backup plan just means you've had more time to figure out how to win. And I was done waiting for permission. There's something strangely satisfying about building something in silence, without applause, without anyone watching, without anyone interfering or steering you off course with their expectations or doubts. Over the next 10 years, while Sam was flashing her teeth in corporate headshots and collecting meaningless promotions like trophies on a shelf, I was growing something solid. My little design consultancy turned into a fully functional creative agency, and not because I got lucky or someone handed me an opportunity wrapped in a silver bow. It was slow, it was gritty, and it was mostly fueled by caffeine, late nights, trial and error, and a burning need to prove them all wrong, though I'd never admit that out loud, not even to myself back then. It wasn't glamorous in the beginning. I worked out of my cramped apartment for 3 years, taking meetings in coffee shops and writing proposals at 2 in the morning. But clients started noticing the results. Word spread. I brought in a few more people, rented a small office, then a bigger one. We moved from just design into full-service branding and marketing strategy. And I didn't just want to compete with agencies like the one Sam worked for, I wanted to outperform them, replace them, buy them out piece by piece while they were too busy sipping their artisanal lattes to notice who was standing behind them with the damn paperwork. Somewhere in the middle of all that growth, I crossed paths with George. He was older, smart as hell, blunt to the point of being almost rude, and he had that sharp eye for undervalued businesses and dying companies with hidden potential. We met at a networking event I almost skipped because I was burned out and annoyed, but something told me to go anyway. He listened to me talk about my business for 10 minutes, then said, "You've got teeth, kid. Let's sharpen them." That was George. No bullshit. No fake compliments. Just strategy, numbers, and instincts honed by decades of watching people rise and fall in the business world. George became more than a mentor. He became my unofficial business partner. He had the capital, the network, and the experience. I had the grit, the vision, and the hunger. Together, we started looking at acquisitions. Not big, flashy ones, but smart ones, agencies that were struggling, owners that wanted out, teams that needed structure. We moved quiet, under the radar, never using my name publicly in deals unless it was absolutely necessary. I liked it that way. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted leverage. One afternoon, George sent me a file. Just a plain folder with a single sticky note that said, "You'll like this one." I opened it. My heart actually paused for half a second when I saw the name of the firm. It was Sam's company. The exact boutique agency that had been paraded around at family dinners like a shining star. I flipped through the financials. They were bleeding out fast. Client retention was trash, overhead was bloated, and internal leadership was a disaster. And yet, they still had a recognizable brand and some legacy clients worth salvaging. I remember staring at that folder for a good 5 minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I already knew exactly what I wanted to do. It wasn't even about Sam, not really. It was about opportunity. Business is cold like that. It doesn't care who you're related to, it only cares about whether or not you can see the cracks before everyone else does. I told George to proceed, but I also told him I wanted it done quietly. No public announcements. No changes to the executive team up front. We'd buy it through a holding company, let the dust settle, and then slowly integrate and restructure. I didn't want my name connected to it, not yet. I wanted to watch. I wanted to see how long it would take before Sam figured out who was really calling the shots. The negotiations took months. There were some headaches, some pushback, a couple of sleepless nights, but eventually it all came together. The contract was signed on a rainy Thursday morning, the ink still wet on the final pages when George slid me a glass of scotch in his office and said, "Congratulations, boss. You just bought your cousin's job." And just like that, the power shifted. Sam was still walking into that office every day thinking she was at the center of the universe. She had no idea the person quietly pulling strings behind the curtain wasn't some faceless investor, but the very same cousin her family had spent a lifetime underestimating. To them, I was still just Emily, the safe bet, the backup plan, the dependable one who probably ran a decent little business, but would never be anything spectacular. And I didn't correct them. I just smiled. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the loudest voice or the brightest light, it's the quiet one who's already 3 steps ahead. And now I was holding all the cards, and she hadn't even noticed. There's something intoxicating about holding power in silence, knowing you're in control while everyone else is still dancing to a rhythm they think they're leading. Once the papers were signed and the acquisition was finalized, I didn't barge in with announcements or start swinging a wrecking ball through the office walls. No dramatic entrance, no throne built from ego, no changes that would alert people to the shift in hierarchy. I wanted it subtle, precise, a quiet evolution that would reveal the rot without me having to raise my voice or throw my weight around. Because real control isn't about shouting orders, it's about creating systems that do the talking for you. I kept the executive team in place for optics. Let them believe they were still steering the ship, at least for a little while longer. But beneath the surface, I began rewiring everything. Policy reviews, budget audits, department performance metrics, all implemented under the guise of new corporate strategy initiatives. George and I hired a third-party consultancy to run internal evaluations, except the firm was mine too, just buried under another layer of holding companies. Every survey, every anonymous feedback form, every performance review was feeding data directly back to my desk, and within a few weeks, the picture was clear as day. The culture in that office had been running on fumes and favoritism for years. There was passive-aggressive sabotage between departments, inflated salaries for incompetent managers, and an entire tier of leadership that had coasted on charm rather than skill. And right at the center of that mess, polished and proud as ever, was my cousin Sam. She walked the halls like royalty, heels clicking like a metronome of self-importance, her team trailing behind her like they were auditioning for a glossy magazine spread instead of running client campaigns. She was still coasting on old wins, on buzzwords, on the illusion of capability that looked impressive to people who didn't know better. But I knew better. I attended my first internal meeting 3 weeks after the acquisition, sitting quietly at the end of a long conference table, wearing plain clothes, my hair tied back, no name tag, no introduction beyond, external consultant. Sam walked in late, as expected, latte in hand, tossing out breezy comments about strategy while tossing her coat onto the back of a chair. She didn't even glance my way. Not once. She was too busy talking about elevating brand narratives and client synergy, most of it empty filler that sounded impressive until you started asking real questions. And I did. I asked a few simple, sharp ones. About ROI metrics. About client churn rates. About campaign failures no one wanted to take ownership of. The room went quiet every time I spoke, but Sam just waved me off with a tight little smile and said something I'll never forget. People like her just don't understand what it takes to run a real business. It hit like a slap across the face, but not the painful kind. The kind that wakes you up, sharpens your senses, makes your blood run cold with clarity. I didn't flinch. I just nodded, took my notes, and smiled. Because she had no idea how real my business was. She had no idea who was sitting at the other end of that table, silently watching every crack in her golden facade widen just enough to break. Over the next month, we ramped up the internal evaluations. Every department was placed under performance audits, and the numbers spoke louder than any resume ever could. Sam's star team, the one she loved to flaunt at company events and brag about over wine at family dinners, was failing miserably. Poor client retention, weak campaign performance, missed deadlines, and bloated budgets that no one could explain. I didn't need to fire anyone yet, I just let the numbers speak for themselves. I let the systems work. Eventually, the HR department, under the guidance of our external consultants, rolled out a new performance review policy, data-driven, impartial, unforgiving. It was the kind of system that didn't care about smiles or speeches or who you knew at the last marketing gala. It cared about delivery, about results, about accountability. And under that new system, Sam's numbers didn't hold up. She got called into a closed-door meeting with the executive team. I didn't attend, but I already knew what was coming. Her title was stripped. She was moved down 2 levels into a lesser strategic role with limited oversight, where she'd be evaluated on actual performance instead of empty leadership metrics. The news hit the office like a quiet shockwave. No dramatic confrontations, no tantrums in the break room, just a slow shift in how people looked at her, a recalibration of where she stood in the hierarchy she once believed she ruled. She didn't take it well, of course. There were whispers, complaints, a few veiled threats of quitting. But where would she go? Her reputation was tied to this firm, and now that reputation was under review. The same people who used to fawn over her were suddenly avoiding eye contact. The ones who once praised her leadership were now rereading emails twice before replying. Because the power dynamics had shifted. The game had changed. And none of them knew who changed it. But I did. This was my playground now. And she hadn't even realized she was just another piece in it. There's a unique kind of silence that comes just before a storm, and I carried that silence with me as I packed my suitcase for the upcoming family reunion, knowing damn well I was walking straight into a room full of people who still believed I was just the quiet cousin with a quaint little business and a sensible lifestyle. I didn't correct them in all these years, not because I was humble or shy, but because I knew the truth carried more weight when it landed heavy after long silence. And now, for the first time in a decade, I was arriving not just as Emily, the reliable one, but as the woman who owned the very company my cousin Sam had been bragging about for years. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. The reunion was hosted at Aunt Denise and Uncle Mark's lake house, the same place where I'd spent so many summer weekends as a teenager watching Sam soak up every ounce of attention while I helped set the table and cleared the dishes afterward. Not much had changed, same deck chairs, same fake smiles, same thinly veiled power plays dressed up as polite conversation. But this time, I wasn't there to impress anyone or prove anything. I was just there to watch. Sam showed up looking like a cracked version of her former self, still dressed to impress, still walking like the queen bee, but the edges had dulled. Her eyes didn't shine with the same smug confidence, and her laugh had an undertone of bitterness that only a few people at that table probably noticed. I noticed, though. I noticed everything. Dinner that night was a grand affair, as always, overcooked roast, too much wine, and way too many stories about other people's children doing remarkable things. Sam waited exactly 20 minutes before launching into a long, dramatic monologue about how things were changing at work and not for the better. She called it a corporate identity crisis, throwing around terms like leadership misalignment and strategic incoherence, clearly hoping to sound like a victim of poor upper management. I sat there, swirling my wine slowly, not saying a word, letting her vent while the others nodded along like they understood any of it. "The new owners are just bleeding the place dry," she said, tossing her fork down a little harder than necessary. "They've implemented these ridiculous systems, cut budgets without understanding the core team dynamics, and frankly, they're killing morale. It's like they don't even care about what made the firm great in the first place." I took a slow sip and gently set my glass down, offering a small smile that wasn't quite a smile, just enough to make her wonder if I knew something she didn't. "That's rough," I said casually. "Must be frustrating dealing with that kind of leadership." She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to decide if I was mocking her or just being polite. I kept my face unreadable. Years of practice. Then, as if on cue, Aunt Denise chimed in, cutting her steak with a little too much force. "Well, not everyone's cut out for executive work, honey," she said to Sam with that same patronizing tone she'd used on me for years, but this time, it was redirected. "Maybe this is a sign it's time to think about something new." Sam rolled her eyes, clearly not used to being on the receiving end of that kind of suggestion. And then she turned her attention to me. "Must be nice for you, Emily," she said with a tight smile. "No corporate pressure, no office politics, just doing your own thing on your own time." I leaned back slightly, let her words hang in the air, and replied with the same calm tone I'd mastered over the years. "Yeah, it's not bad. I guess some of us just get lucky." It was subtle, but I saw the flicker of suspicion cross her face. Just a flash, like a shadow passing behind her eyes. She didn't know why that line bothered her, but it did. And that's all I needed. The rest of dinner played out in slow motion, with Sam picking at her food, throwing a few more jabs, and me replying with offhand sarcasm that kept her off balance. The family kept up their usual performance, but something was shifting, even if they didn't quite know it yet. The atmosphere had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing, controlling, calculating every word. Then, just as dessert was being served, I felt my phone buzz quietly in my lap. A message from George, short and sharp. Ready to tell them? I looked across the table at Sam, who was laughing a little too loud at something Uncle Mark had said, pretending nothing was unraveling beneath her carefully curated surface. And I felt that stillness again, the one before the storm. Not yet, I thought. But soon. Because some truths deserve to drop like thunder. There are moments in life that don't just shift the atmosphere, they gut it, slice it wide open, and leave every person in the room scrambling to figure out what the hell just happened. And sometimes, all it takes is one sentence. One calm, almost casual sentence that lands like a wrecking ball in a room full of people who've spent their whole lives pretending their world is built on something solid. I didn't wake up that morning planning to drop a bomb on my entire family during brunch, but when the moment presented itself, I didn't hesitate either. Because when you spend your whole life being underestimated, ignored, or politely tolerated, there's a certain kind of satisfaction in watching that illusion collapse in real time. The morning sun was warm and irritatingly cheerful, pouring through the lake house windows like the universe was in a good mood, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The family was gathered around the long wooden table that had probably hosted 2 decades worth of awkward conversations and passive-aggressive jabs. Plates were full, coffee was flowing, and everyone was pretending to enjoy each other's company the way families always do after a night of drinking too much wine and suppressing too many old grudges. Sam, of course, couldn't resist bringing up her job again. She waited until people were halfway through their omelets, then launched into another one of her melodramatic tales of professional injustice. She talked about how the new owners were suffocating innovation, how the company culture had become toxic, how no one respected the work she had done, and how leadership had turned against her for reasons she couldn't quite understand. The words came out smooth, like a speech she'd practiced in front of a mirror. She was fishing hard for pity, for validation, for someone to tell her she was still the shining star in a world that suddenly stopped applauding. I kept cutting into my egg slowly, nodding along like I was actually listening, but inside I was waiting. I didn't even realize I was going to say it until it was already halfway out of my mouth, like my body had decided for me. I set my fork down gently, looked up at her, and said it in the calmest, most nonchalant tone I could manage. You know what's funny? I actually own that company now. At first, it didn't register. There was a split second where everyone just kept chewing, eyes focused elsewhere, conversations still half alive. But then it hit. Aunt Denise's fork dropped onto her plate with a sharp clatter. Uncle Mark froze mid-sip, his coffee mug shaking slightly in his hand. My mother blinked twice like she hadn't heard me correctly. And Sam, her face drained of color so fast you'd think she'd just been slapped by a ghost. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Just air and disbelief. The silence was thick and suffocating, the kind that stretches seconds into something much longer. I picked up my fork again, took another bite of eggs, and kept chewing like I'd just commented on the weather. Nobody spoke for what felt like a full minute, and when someone finally did, it was Sam. "You're joking," she said, voice shaky and brittle. "That's not funny, Emily." "I'm not joking," I replied calmly, not even bothering to look up from my plate. "I bought the company 6 months ago, through a holding firm. George handled the deal. It's mine." Sam looked around the table like someone would jump in and correct me, like this was some elaborate prank designed to humiliate her. But no one spoke, because there was nothing to say. It was real. It was done. And there was no one hearing it now. You sabotaged me," she finally hissed, eyes narrowing, voice rising. You've been sitting there watching me struggle, letting me fail on purpose. I wiped my mouth with a napkin, still calm, still composed. Maybe if you were better at your job, I wouldn't have noticed you at all. That sentence hit harder than the first. I saw it in her face, the way her jaw clenched, the way her eyes glossed over with humiliation and rage. Years of unchecked arrogance unraveling in an instant. And then it began, the implosion I'd been silently anticipating for years. Aunt Denise stood up, flustered and sputtering, demanding explanations. Uncle Mark jumped in to defend Sam's legacy. My mother tried to defuse the tension with some half-hearted comment about family unity, but it was too late for any of that now. The gloves came off. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the company. It was about everything: childhood favoritism, backhanded compliments, all the years I'd been dismissed, the way they'd constantly held Sam up as the standard while I was expected to just be content with the scraps of attention and praise. Every unspoken resentment came boiling to the surface, and nobody could stop it. Sam shouted, Aunt Denise cried, my father went silent like he always did when things got uncomfortable, and I just sat there, watching it all unfold like a spectator at a show I didn't even have to pay to attend. Eventually, I stood up, not out of anger, not to storm off, but simply because I'd had enough. I picked up my coffee, walked toward the porch doors, and didn't say another word. The storm was already raging behind me, and there was nothing left to add. But just as I reached the steps outside, I heard footsteps behind me, hurried, desperate. It was Sam. She followed me out onto the porch, eyes burning with something between betrayal and desperation, and for a second, I wondered what she could possibly have left to say. Why did you really do it? She asked, voice cracking under the weight of everything she hadn't expected to feel. And I just stood there, holding my coffee, staring out at the lake, deciding whether she even deserved an answer. I stood there on the porch, still holding my coffee cup, the morning air thick with the aftershocks of what had just happened inside that house. Sam's question hung in the air between us, raw and trembling, like a string pulled tight but not yet snapped. Her voice still cracked around the edges, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as the invincible, untouchable golden child my family had always worshipped, but as a woman unraveling under the weight of her own illusion. She looked at me with a mix of disbelief and something dangerously close to fear, and I think part of her still didn't want to believe it was real. That I had done it. That I had beaten her at the one game she thought she owned. Why did you really do it? She asked again, quieter this time, like maybe if she softened the question, she'd get a different answer, something gentler, something that made her feel less exposed. I turned to face her fully, took one long breath, and met her eyes without flinching. Because for once, I said slowly, carefully, like I wanted every word to land exactly where it was supposed to, I wanted you to feel what I felt growing up, overlooked, underestimated, invisible. She blinked like she'd been slapped, even though I hadn't raised my voice. That's the thing about truth, it doesn't need to be loud to hurt. It just needs to be undeniable. You think that justifies this? She shot back, bitterness replacing the last trace of vulnerability in her tone. You think tearing me down makes you better than them? I gave a small laugh, not out of amusement, but because the irony was too rich to ignore. Better, I said, tilting my head slightly. I don't know if it makes me better, but it sure as hell makes me honest. And maybe that's worse in your eyes. You're cruel, she snapped, stepping closer, her voice cracking again. You're not some silent hero. You're just another bitter woman with a grudge. Cruel? I echoed, nodding slowly. Or just finally honest? She didn't answer. Maybe because she knew that deep down, she wasn't entirely wrong, and neither was I. That's the line we'd both been walking our whole lives, me in the shadows, her in the spotlight, both pretending there wasn't a price to pay for being cast into one role or the other. The truth is, I didn't plan to ruin her. I didn't wake up one day and decide to destroy her world. But when the opportunity came, when the door opened, I didn't hesitate to step through it, and maybe that says something about me I'm still not ready to admit. I finished my coffee, set the cup down on the porch rail, and walked toward my car without another word. I could feel her eyes on my back the entire way, like she was still waiting for some kind of closure or apology or maybe even a final insult she could carry around like a wound. But I gave her nothing. I didn't need to anymore. When I got into the car and started the engine, I rolled the windows down and let the cool breeze hit my face as I pulled away from that lake house for what I hoped would be the last damn time. The road curved through the trees, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not even pride, just control. I finally had control of my own narrative, and no one, not Sam, not Aunt Denise, not the entire Shaw family tree, could take that from me now. And maybe that's what this was really about from the beginning, not revenge, not power, but the simple, stubborn need to stop living in someone else's shadow. Did I go too far? Maybe. But after 40 years of being their backup plan, their safety net, their second best, I think I earned this. I didn't burn the house down. I just took the keys and walked away while they were still arguing over who left the door open. As I turned onto the main road, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A voicemail. I tapped the speaker button and let it play through the car speakers while the wind whipped through my hair. It was George. Hey, his voice crackled, casual and dry as always. Just a heads up, there's another offer on the table. A pretty interesting one, actually. Uncle Mark's firm is looking vulnerable. If you're in the mood for a little symmetry, well, wouldn't that be poetic? I smiled, not because I had made a decision, but because the idea itself was so absurdly perfect that I could almost taste the irony. Maybe I'd do it. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe some battles are better left unfought. Or maybe some legacies deserve to be rewritten, piece by piece, by the very person they never saw coming. I didn't answer the call. Not yet. I just kept driving, the road stretching wide ahead of me, open and silent, waiting for whatever came next. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered, "This isn't over." And maybe it never would be.